I was 23 years old when it all began. I was studying on the final year at a technical college in Ohio, working at an auto repair shop on the outskirts of town, and sometimes, in my free time, exploring abandoned buildings with friends. It was our way of escaping the monotony, the endless classes and night shifts. We called ourselves urban explorers, though honestly, we were just chasing adrenaline. It was Halloween night, October 31st, 2023. There were 4 of us. I was driving my old Honda Red on the front seat, scrolling through a map on my phone. Behind me were Luis and Maddie. We found the location a week earlier on some forum, a derelict fire station in a small town called Kelso, about 40 miles north. The building had been closed since the early 90s, standing abandoned ever since. No security, no fences. The perfect place for Halloween. We arrived around 9 in the evening. Kelso was a tiny town, maybe a couple thousand residents. Main street, a church, 1 gas station. The fire station was on the edge of town, a 2-story brick building with wide garage doors for fire trucks. The windows were broken, the walls covered in graffiti. We parked around the corner so the car wouldn't be visible from the road inside, entered through a broken window into the basement. Red was the first to go, then helped Maddie. Next, Luis and I. We turned on our flashlights. The basement was cluttered with trash, old tires, empty cans, bits of rebar, and a strong smell of mold and dampness. We climbed a concrete staircase up to the first floor, which looked as typical as any abandoned place. A row of rusty lockers along the wall, old wooden chairs, tables covered in thick dust. In the corner stood a broken refrigerator with its door hanging open. Faded fire safety posters hung on the walls. Luis took a few pictures on his phone. Maddie was inspecting the lockers. Rid headed down the long corridor at the back. I stood by the window looking out onto the deserted street. There were no streetlights burning, only the faint moonlight. The town looked dead. Luis returned in a couple of minutes, saying he found the staircase leading to the 2nd floor. We headed after him. The stairs squeaked under our weight. The 2nd floor was smaller, just 4 rooms and a long corridor. Rid went into the first room on the left, Luis and Maddie into the farthest. I entered the room on the right. Inside was an old metal bed. The mattress had long rotted away. Old newspaper scraps and empty bottles were scattered on the floor. I picked up a newspaper dated 1991. That was when I heard Luis's voice from the far room. He wasn't shouting, just calling us. We gathered in the corridor and went toward his voice. Luis stood in the doorway, shining his flashlight inside. I peeked over his shoulder and froze. The room was spotless. Not just cleaner than the others, but completely pristine, immaculate. The floor was cleaned, the walls white and spotless. In the corner stood a neatly made mattress with a clean gray blanket. A folded white shirt lay on the windowsill. The window was intact, no cracks, smelling faintly of bleach. Maddie was the first to step inside. We followed her. Reid approached the windowsill, looked at the shirt, but didn't touch it. Luis shone his flashlight around the corners. I stood by the door, trying to understand how this room could be so clean in a building unused for over 30 years. Then I saw footprints, boot prints in the dusty corridor floor. They led from the staircase directly to this room. Fresh prints, not covered in dust. I bent down to get a better look and noticed the prints didn't just lead to the room, but continued down the corridor to another room. I straightened up and headed there. Rita called me, but I had already reached the door. It was ajar. I pushed it open with my flashlight and peeked inside. The room was empty, but by the far wall stood a man in a white shirt and dark pants. His clothes were impeccably clean, hair neatly slicked back. He stood facing the wall, motionless, hands by his sides. I didn't immediately realize he was real because he didn't move, not even breathe. I stepped back a pace. My flashlight flickered. The man slowly turned his head. Not his whole body, just his head. I saw his face, pale, expressionless, eyes dark and empty. He looked straight at me. I screamed, turned and ran for the stairs. I heard Rid, Luis, and Matey running after me. We fled down to the first floor without stopping, jumped over debris in the basement, and escaped through the window. We ran to the car. I started the engine with trembling hands, and we drove off. No one spoke for the first 10 minutes. Maddie was breathing heavily in the back seat. Luis stared out the window. Rid gripped his phone tightly. I drove faster than necessary, just wanting to get away from Kelso. When we reached the highway, Rid finally spoke up, asking who that was. I said I didn't know. Luis guessed it might be a homeless man who lived in the building. Maddie stayed silent. I looked in the rearview mirror to check if anyone was following. The road was empty. We got back to town around midnight, dropped Maddie and Luis at their homes. We agreed not to talk about it anymore. Rid was the last out. Before closing the door, he said we were just lucky to get out in time. I nodded and drove home. I lived in a small apartment on the second floor of an old building on the campus outskirts. Parked, climbed the stairs, locked the door with both locks, took a shower, trying to wash off the smell of mold and dust. Went to bed around 1 a.m. but couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man standing facing the wall. At 3 a.m., I heard tapping at the window. Soft, methodical. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again. I froze. Pulled the blanket up to my chin. The tapping repeated. I stood and approached the window, not turning on the light. I slid the curtain a couple of centimeters and looked down. Under the street lamp stood the same man, the same white shirt, the same dark pants. He stared directly at my window, motionless, just watching. I closed the curtain and retreated to bed. My heart pounded. I waited a minute, looked again. He was still there. I didn't sleep until dawn. At 6 a.m., I looked out the window. The street was empty. On November 1st, I woke with a headache. Called work, said I was sick and stayed home. Tried to convince myself it was all a coincidence. Maybe it was just someone from town, out for a nighttime walk. Maybe I misread his face in the dark. Around 10 a.m., I got a message from Rid. Did you see him? He was at my work. I stared at the screen, then typed back. Who? Rid sent a photo, a blurry shot through a shop window where he worked. In the background, behind a row of shelves, stood a man in a white shirt. I called Rid. He answered immediately, voice tense. He said he opened the shop in the morning and about an hour later saw that man inside. He was just standing by the far wall, looking toward him. Rid approached, wanting to ask if help was needed, but the man turned and left. When Rid ran outside, no one was there. I told Rid about the man I saw outside my window at night. Rid was silent, then asked if it could be the same person. I didn't know what to say. Around noon, Luis wrote in our group chat, I'm losing it. He's been standing across from my house for 3 hours. I called him, but Luis didn't answer. 5 minutes later, I called again. The phone was off. I messaged Maddie and asked if she'd heard from Luis. She said no. I got in my car and drove to Luis's house. He lived in the suburbs, a small private house with his parents. I parked by the curb and went to the front door. The door was ajar. I called for Luis. No answer. I went inside. The house was empty. Luis's phone lay on the kitchen table. The screen cracked. Car keys hung on the door hook. A backpack stood in the hallway. I searched all the rooms and garage. No one. Luis's parents worked late and wouldn't be home until evening. I stepped outside and looked around. Opposite the house was an empty parking lot. No tracks, no cars. I called Rid and Maddie, told them Luis was missing. We agreed to meet at my place in an hour. Rid arrived first. Maddie came 20 minutes later. We sat in the kitchen trying to figure out what to do. Rid suggested calling the police. But what would we say? That our friend disappeared after we saw a strange man in an abandoned building, and now the man was stalking us? Maddie said it sounded crazy. We decided to wait until evening. Maybe Luis would show. I made coffee. We sat in silence. Around 5 p.m., I went to the supermarket for food. Rid and Maddie stayed at my place. There were few people in the store. I grabbed a basket and headed to the dairy aisle, picking out yogurts, when I felt someone watching. I looked up and saw him at the end of the aisle. The same man, same white shirt. He stood motionless, hands at his sides, staring right at me. I blinked. He vanished. The aisle was empty. I dropped my basket and left the store without waiting for my receipt. Got in my car, hands shaking, and drove home empty-handed. Rita and Maddie were still at my place. I told them about the supermarket. Maddie turned pale, saying she had seen him that day near the university. He stood under a tree, watching her classroom window. She thought she imagined it, but now she wasn't sure. We stayed up until midnight discussing what to do. Decided we'd try to find Luis the next day, and if not, we'd go to the police. Maddie and Rid left. I was alone. That night I didn't sleep. Sat on the couch, staring at the front door. Every outside sound made me jump. On the morning of November 2nd, I tried calling Luis. His phone was still off. I called Rid. He said he couldn't reach him either. Maddie didn't answer calls. I called her 5 times, sent 3 messages, no response. Around noon, I went to Maddie's dorm room. She lived on the 4th floor. I knocked on the door. Her roommate opened and said Maddie left in the morning and hasn't come back. She asked if something happened. I said I was just looking for her and left. I called Rid and told him Maddie was also missing. Rid was silent for a few seconds, then said he'd seen the man again. In the morning, as he was leaving his house, the man stood across the street at the bus stop. Rid got into his car and left without looking back. We met at a cafe on Main Street, sitting by the window drinking coffee that was quickly getting cold. Rid looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. He said he hadn't slept much for 2 nights. He saw the man in his apartment mirror while brushing his teeth. Turned around. No one was there. I told him about Maddie. Ride put his head in his hands and said we should have gone to the police right away. I agreed. We decided to go to the station after lunch. Around 3 p.m. I went to work. I needed to finish a repair or I'd lose the client. Rid said he'd wait for me and then we'd go to the police together. I agreed. The auto shop was empty. The owner was out of town for the weekend and left me the keys. I went inside, turned on the light, and approached the car I was working on, replacing brake pads. The job wouldn't take more than an hour. About 20 minutes later, I heard the door creak. I turned around. There, at the entrance, stood that man, white shirt, dark pants. He was looking at me through the dirty glass of the door. I dropped my tools and ran to the back door. I ran outside and looked back. The entrance door was closed. No one was visible inside. I called Rid and told him I'd seen him again. Rid said he was on his way. I waited outside, not going back into the shop. Rid arrived in 10 minutes. We got in his car and went to the station. On the way, Rid looked in the rearview mirror and slammed on the brakes. I hit the dashboard and asked what happened. Rid was silent, staring into the mirror. I turned around. No one was in the back seat. Rid said he'd seen him sitting right behind me. We got out and checked the back seat. Empty. Rid said he couldn't take it anymore. He said he knew what would happen next. I tried to calm him down, but he distanced himself, got back in the car, and said we had to return to the fire station. Maybe we'd find some answers there. I didn't want to go back but agreed. We drove to Kelso, arrived around 6 p.m. It was already getting dark. The town looked just as empty as that night. We parked by the fire station and entered through the same broken basement window, turned on the flashlights and climbed to the first floor. Everything was the same. Rusty lockers, dust, trash. We went up the stairs to the second floor, walked down the corridor to the clean room. The door was open. We peered inside. The room was empty. Not just empty. There was nothing. No mattress, no blanket, no shirt on the windowsill. Just bare walls and floor. Rid walked in, shining his flashlight around. I stayed by the door. He said something, but I didn't hear. The door slammed shut abruptly. I tried to open it, but the handle wouldn't turn. I hit the door, screamed. Rid shouted from the other side, pounding on the door. I pushed with all my might, but the door didn't budge. After a minute, the pounding stopped. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. Silence. I called out for Rid. No answer. The door slowly opened by itself. The room was empty. Rid was gone. Only his jacket lay on the floor, neatly folded. I rushed out of the room, fled down the stairs, climbed out the window, got into the car. Rid's keys were in the ignition. I drove away without looking back. I returned to town, parked at my place, went inside and locked all doors and windows. For 3 days, I didn't leave. I ate what was in the fridge, ignored calls, trying to make sense of what was happening. On the 4th day, I found an old article online about the fire station in Kelso. In 1987, a firefighter named Nathan Cross disappeared there. He was searched for a month, but never found. A year later, when the building was already closed, workers found his body in one of the second-floor rooms. The body looked like he had died just yesterday. The autopsy showed he had been dead for over a year. I looked at Nathan Cross's photo in the article. The same man, the same white shirt. That night, I saw him for the last time. He stood by my window, staring inside. I didn't close the curtain. I just looked back. We stood like that for several minutes. Then he slowly turned and left, disappearing into the darkness. 2 years have passed. Luis, Mady, and Rid were never found. The police closed their cases, declaring them missing. Luis's parents still search for him. I haven't told them the truth because I don't understand what happened myself. I still live in the same apartment, work in the same shop. I no longer explore abandoned buildings. Sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see a silhouette behind me. Just for a second. Then it disappears. I know Nathan is still nearby, just waiting. I don't know why he didn't take me then. Maybe because I wasn't afraid last time. I just kept looking at him. Maybe he got what he wanted. Or maybe he's just waiting for the right moment. I no longer go out alone at night, don't open the door to strangers. I always check the back seat before getting into the car. And I never, ever stare too long in the mirror. Because sometimes when I do, I see him standing there behind me in the same white shirt, the same empty gaze. And in those moments, I realize he's gone nowhere. He's still here, still watching, just waiting. Thank you for watching.